You ever have one of those moments where you realize you're not just fighting for your home, you're fighting for your dignity? That was me, the night HOA Karen called 911 on me for refusing to leave my own cabin. And what happened next, flipped this whole county upside down. The story begins with me sitting on the porch of my cabin, the one I had bought years ago as a quiet retreat. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend. The lake shimmered in the moonlight, and the crickets sang in the background. But peace doesn't last long when Karen from the HOA is involved. Karen marched up the gravel driveway with that familiar scowl etched across her face. Her clipboard was clutched tightly against her chest, like a shield of authority she never truly had. She started rattling off violations, claiming my porch light was too bright, my woodpile wasn't stacked properly, even that the gravel wasn't uniform enough. I reminded her calmly, this cabin isn't even under your HOA. You don't have any power here. That's when she smirked, pulled out her phone, and dialed 911. She announced loudly, so I and anyone listening could hear, "Yes, officer, there's a trespasser refusing to leave private property. He's aggressive and dangerous." I couldn't believe it. She was trying to have me removed from my own land. When the squad car rolled up, the two officers got out, hands resting near their belts. Karen wasted no time, running over to them, fake tears in her eyes. "That's him. He won't leave. He threatened me." I stood firm. "Officers, before you make a mistake, let me show you something." I pulled out my property deed, notarized and filed with the county clerk. Not only did it show I owned the cabin, it revealed something much bigger. A detail most people didn't know. The land this HOA sat on, every road, every pond, every wooded trail, all of it had been purchased under a land trust. And the trust was mine. Which meant Karen wasn't just calling the cops on some random cabin owner. She was calling the cops on the actual legal owner of the entire county district her HOA claimed to run. The officers exchanged looks. Karen's smirk faltered. And for the first time, she didn't seem so sure of herself. This was no longer just a neighborly dispute. It was the spark that would set off a war, one that would end in a courtroom showdown and the unraveling of a fraud scheme no one saw coming. After that night, Karen and her little HOA gang doubled down. It wasn't enough that I had proven ownership. They wanted me gone. They wanted control. The very next morning, a slip of paper was tucked under my cabin door, HOA fine, $5,000 for unauthorized occupancy. I laughed. It was nonsense. But when I flipped the page over, my smile faded. The notice wasn't just printed with HOA letterhead, it carried what looked like a sheriff's seal. That's when I realized, this wasn't incompetence. It was fraud. 2 days later, things escalated. A truck with flashing lights pulled into my driveway. Out stepped 3 men in uniforms that looked like police, but something was off. Their badges didn't match the county's official seal. Their belts carried holsters but no firearms, only radios that weren't even switched on. "Sir, you need to vacate the premises immediately," one of them said in a rehearsed, flat tone. Karen stood behind them, arms folded, enjoying the show. "Funny," I said, holding up my attorney general's ID. "Because I know every officer in this county. And you? You're not one of them." The fake cops froze. Karen's smirk faltered again. Within minutes, I had real law enforcement on the line, and when a legitimate deputy arrived, the imposters scattered like cockroaches. Karen tried to play innocent, I thought they were real officers. I just called for help. But the cracks in her story were already showing. That was the first domino. And once it fell, I knew it was only a matter of time before the whole scam came crashing down. But I didn't realize how far the HOA's corruption went, or how many powerful people were protecting their lies. When the fake cops ran off and Karen tried to wash her hands of the incident, I knew something deeper was at play. HOAs don't just conjure up fake officers overnight. This was organized. I drove straight into town the next morning, heading to the county clerk's office. My gut told me the paper trail would tell me more than Karen's smug little games ever could. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old paper. The clerk, Mrs. Harris, greeted me nervously. "Back again, Mr. Attorney General. What can I help you with?" I slid the fake sheriff's seal across the counter. "Recognize this?" Her eyes darted around the room before she lowered her voice. I've seen it before. Documents have been filed with this exact mark." "Filed by who?" I pressed. She hesitated, then pulled a locked drawer open, extracting a stack of folders. Inside were dozens of official notices, all bearing the same fraudulent seal. Each one demanded outrageous fines from homeowners. $10,000 for an unapproved mailbox, $15,000 for fence height violations, and even one for $25,000 for lawn discoloration. These weren't HOA rules. These were extortion letters dressed up as law. "Why didn't you report this?" I asked sharply. Tears welled in her eyes. "Because the HOA's president threatened me. He said if I didn't keep filing their paperwork, they'd ruin me. They control everything here, the board, the inspectors, even the sheriff's office is afraid of them." That last line hit me hard. Even the sheriff's office? I flipped to the back of the file, where the signatures were. One name jumped out immediately, Judge Crane. The same judge who had signed off on every HOA foreclosure in the county for the past 5 years. The scheme was bigger than Karen. Bigger than the HOA. This was a pipeline, fake fines, fake cops, homeowners bullied into paying, and when they couldn't, Judge Crane would rubber stamp the foreclosure. The HOA would then seize the house, flip it, and pocket the cash. And Karen? She wasn't just some nosy neighbor. She was a cog in a machine. As I stood there with those files in my hands, Mrs. Harris whispered something I'll never forget. "They don't just want your cabin. They want everything. And if you don't stop them, they'll destroy you, too." For the first time, I realized this wasn't about property anymore. This was about survival. Armed with the clerk's files, I headed back to my cabin. But the road wasn't quiet anymore. At every corner, I noticed the same SUV parked, engines idling, men in dark jackets watching me like hawks. The HOA had eyes everywhere. By the time I reached the cabin, my front gate had been spray-painted in red, "Get out now." Karen was there too, standing in the street with 3 other board members. They didn't bother hiding their hostility anymore. One of them shouted, "You think your little badge scares us? You're one man against an entire county." I wanted to shout back, but instead, I did what I'd always done best, gather evidence. I snapped photos of the vandalism, their faces, their cars. Every piece of intimidation was another nail in their coffin. That night, as I sat by the fire inside, I couldn't sleep. I replayed the clerk's words. Judge Crane. Fake cops. Homeowners losing everything. This wasn't just harassment. This was a racket worth millions. And it wasn't just happening to me. I decided to dig deeper. The next morning, I visited a family who had lost their home 6 months earlier. The Johnsons were kind people, 2 kids, a father who worked double shifts at the mill, and a mother who ran a small bakery. When I asked them what had happened, their eyes filled with anger and pain. "They fined us for everything," Mr. Johnson said. "Our mailbox, our fence, even our doghouse. We paid until we couldn't anymore. Then they sent fake sheriffs to evict us. We went to court, and Judge Crane ruled against us in 5 minutes. Now the HOA president's nephew lives in our house." It was the same pattern, over and over. Dozens of families, stripped of their homes, their savings drained. By the time I left, my blood boiled with fury. Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was helping run a system that preyed on hardworking families. I sat in my truck, staring at the courthouse in the distance. I knew what had to be done. If they wanted war, I'd give them war. And I wouldn't stop until every single one of them, from Karen to the judge himself, was exposed in front of the entire state. The day of the first hearing arrived. My petition wasn't just about my cabin, it was about exposing fraud on a county-wide scale. The courthouse buzzed with whispers as people gathered. Families who had been wronged filled the benches. Karen and her board strutted in like they owned the place. Judge Crane presided at the bench, his icy glare fixed on me. "Mr. Attorney General," he said coldly, "you've brought quite the spectacle. Let's hope you have more than accusations." I stood, holding up the files from the clerk's office. "Your Honor, what I have isn't speculation. It's evidence. Evidence of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to defraud homeowners across this county." I laid out the documents one by one: fake fines, phony sheriff seals, coerced evictions. Each piece connected back to the HOA. And each one bore Judge Crane's signature. The room stirred. Gasps echoed. Karen's face went pale. Crane banged his gavel. "Objection. These are inadmissible without proper verification." But before he could dismiss them, I slid the final document forward. A recorded affidavit from Mrs. Harris, sworn under penalty of perjury. It spelled out everything. The threats. The pressure. The illegal filings. Crane's hands trembled. For the first time, he wasn't in control. But then, just as quickly, he regained his composure. "Mr. Attorney General," he sneered, "you've overstepped. Case dismissed." The gavel came down like a gunshot. Karen smirked, her confidence restored. The board members chuckled under their breath. But what they didn't realize was that I wasn't done. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Because outside that courtroom, waiting for me, were 3 federal agents. And they had been watching this county for a long time. The moment I stepped outside the courthouse, the tension shifted. The 3 federal agents greeted me quietly, their eyes scanning every corner of the building. "We've been tracking this HOA and Judge Crane for months," one said. "We needed someone on the inside, someone they wouldn't suspect. That's where you came in." I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. This wasn't just about reclaiming my cabin anymore. It was about stopping a system built on lies, intimidation, and stolen lives. We huddled in a quiet alley behind the courthouse. They showed me the evidence they had compiled: bank transfers linked to HOA board members, emails coordinating fake fines, recordings of phone calls where Judge Crane gave instructions on how to legally manipulate homeowners, and even real estate transfers that had been quietly filed under shell companies. "You see why we need you," one agent said. "They think they're untouchable because they control local courts and law enforcement. But the moment we go public, everything they've built will collapse." I swallowed hard. My cabin was safe, yes, but the families whose lives had been destroyed by this system weren't. That gave me no choice. Karen's calls to 911, her smirks, her fake threats, they were nothing compared to what was coming. We spent the next 2 weeks quietly gathering statements from victims, recording confessions from lower-level HOA enforcers, and cross-referencing every piece of fraudulent paperwork. Each revelation was worse than the last. Families evicted over trivial violations, life savings drained, and a county leadership that laughed while people cried. Karen was oblivious. She continued her intimidation tactics, sending letters and fake notices, thinking she could bully me into silence. But with federal oversight, every move she made became evidence. Every harassing phone call, every falsified record, every attempted eviction, it was being documented. By the 3rd week, the federal agents told me they had enough evidence to make arrests. But they needed one final piece: Karen admitting her role in the fraud. We set the trap. I invited Karen to my cabin, pretending to negotiate a truce. As soon as she stepped onto my property, cameras captured her every move. Every lie she uttered, every threat she made, and her attempt to manipulate me into dropping the case was recorded. That footage, combined with the financial and legal evidence, would be enough to take down the entire HOA ring, including Judge Crane himself. The county that once seemed untouchable was about to face a reckoning. Karen arrived at the cabin dressed in her signature blue blazer, perfectly pressed, her clipboard in hand like a weapon. She smiled sweetly, trying to mask the tension she clearly felt. "I think we can resolve this amicably," she said, pacing the porch. "You don't want to make enemies of people in power." I let her talk, letting the hidden cameras record every word. The federal agents stayed hidden, their lenses capturing her expressions, her gestures, every deceitful sentence. "You don't understand," I replied calmly. "This isn't about friendship. This is about accountability." Her smirk faltered. She leaned closer, trying to intimidate me. "Do you really think you can take on an entire county? Do you know who you're messing with?" "I do," I said, holding up the property deed. "And I own more than just my cabin." Karen laughed nervously. "That's impossible. You're bluffing." I shook my head. "Check the county records. I own every inch of this land. Every road, every trail, every property the HOA claims jurisdiction over." Her eyes widened. The bravado disappeared. For the first time, she realized she wasn't just arguing with a cabin owner, she was facing the actual legal authority over everything she had tried to control. She lunged at me, screaming, trying to snatch the deed from my hand. In seconds, federal agents emerged from their hiding spots, cuffing her and reading her rights. Karen's protests filled the cabin, but it was futile. Every attempt to manipulate or intimidate had been recorded. As they led her away, I watched the woman who had caused so much pain, fake fines, harassment, threats, finally face consequences. Families who had suffered at her hands could finally breathe. The HOA board members were next. Once Karen's involvement was exposed, their fear was palpable. One by one, they were summoned to testify, facing the reality they'd long avoided: the county was no longer theirs to control. And Judge Crane? He had no choice but to resign after an emergency investigation revealed the depth of his corruption. It was justice, slow but undeniable. With Karen in custody, the federal investigation intensified. Each day brought new revelations: bank accounts frozen, property transfers reversed, falsified fines declared null and void. Families who had lost everything were reinstated, and the county began the long process of restitution. I sat in my cabin one morning, looking over the lake. The sun glinted off the water, and for the first time in months, it felt peaceful. The fake cops, the intimidation, the endless harassment, it was all over. But the emotional weight of what happened lingered. I visited the Johnsons, who had been evicted, and handed them the keys to their home again. Their tears of gratitude reminded me why I fought so hard. It wasn't just about property, it was about restoring lives, dignity, and hope. Every family had a story. Every property reclaimed was a victory not just for me, but for justice itself. And while Karen's arrest was the headline, the real triumph was seeing a system once designed to exploit people being dismantled. The courtroom was packed when the final hearings began. Karen faced multiple charges: fraud, harassment, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Judge Crane faced charges of corruption, forgery, and aiding a criminal enterprise. Families filled the seats, watching as justice unfolded in real time. Testimonies from homeowners, federal agents, and even HOA employees painted a picture so stark it left the courtroom in stunned silence. Karen tried to plead ignorance, but the evidence was overwhelming. Every fake fine, every fake cop, every intimidating phone call was documented. And with my initial recordings and the federal investigation, her lies crumbled like sand. By the end of the week, Karen received a lengthy prison sentence. Judge Crane resigned, facing his own legal consequences. The HOA board members were banned from public office and ordered to pay restitution. It was a victory not just for me, but for the entire county. The corrupt system that had preyed on innocent families was finally exposed. I returned to my cabin one last time, the sun setting over the lake. The air smelled of pine and fresh earth, peaceful, free. The weight of months of stress lifted, replaced with quiet satisfaction. The county was no longer under the grip of fear. Families were reunited with their homes. The streets that once echoed with threats and intimidation were now calm. Children played freely where HOA enforcers once prowled. I sat on the porch, reflecting. Justice wasn't instant, and it wasn't easy. But it was possible. One call to 911 had seemed like a threat, a nuisance, yet it had ignited a chain reaction that exposed corruption and restored hope. Karen's actions were extreme, but they showed the lengths people would go to protect power and money. And yet, even against overwhelming odds, the truth had a way of winning. As night fell, I looked at the stars above my cabin. This land wasn't just property. It was a symbol of resilience, integrity, and perseverance. I had fought not just for myself, but for every person who had been silenced or intimidated. And now, as the county breathed freely, I knew one thing: sometimes, justice requires courage, patience, and standing firm, even when the odds seem impossible. The story wasn't just about defeating Karen or reclaiming a cabin, it was about showing that no system of fear is stronger than truth. And as the moonlight reflected off the lake, I smiled, knowing that justice, finally, had been served.